So a couple of weeks ago, I got a letter from my home insurance company telling me we're not going to renew your insurance policy. And I turned to my wife and I was thinking, like, what do we do? Did we miss a payment or something? No, they want nothing to do with California and they're leaving. Now, the crazy part is that they're not alone. I had Farmers Insurance, but State Farm, Allstate, they're all leaving California. And some of the reasons why, I'm sure you guys will start to kind of guess what they are, is complicated, actually. It's not that straightforward. So let's kind of start with, here's a picture, by the way, of the insurance commissioner of California. His name's Ricardo Lara. And got it. Okay, here's a picture of Ricardo Lara, who is the commissioner. And as you can imagine, California is a very regulated state, right? So like we mentioned, 7 of the largest 12 have left in the last year. That's pretty scary stuff. But as you can imagine, California is really regulated. And back in 1988, they passed a Proposition 103 that meant that you would have to get permission from the State Department in order to increase rate. And that is kind of part of where this problem comes, because the goal was to protect us, right, homeowners. That way, the insurance companies couldn't just jack up rates whenever. So that sounds like a good thing, but the problem is there have been unintended consequences. Now, another component of how they do this is when you get a home insurance quote, by law, the insurance company in California anyway, and we'll talk about other states. Somebody mentioned Florida, and this is not just a California problem, which we'll get to. But in California, you have to base your rate on history, meaning you can't look at like, hey, there's a wildfire 5 miles from this dude's house. Nope, can't consider that. You have to insure them based on history, not current or the future. And so that really kind of puts strain on these insurance companies, right? And so they've had to make this decision. So there's a huge kind of fallout from all of this. And as a result, we're going to see some changes. Ron says, greed, of course, but it's complicated. Let's take a step back and talk about insurance in general. My house would cost $1 million to rebuild. I don't have $1 million laying around. So what would I do? I live in this thing and it's my house, but if a fire rolled through, there was an earthquake, I got flooded, whatever the case might be, I would have rubble. I'd have a land with no house on it and have to pitch a tent. What would I do, right? Well, you get insurance. And the policy that you get only works because let's say there's 10,000 people in your neighborhood and they all have home insurance and one person's house burns down, maybe Thanksgiving, there was a turkey that caught fire and the whole house burned down. If that were to happen, that insurance company would take the $10,000 payments from all these different people and pay out one policy and they'd be in business, right? Now, obviously, these are for-profit companies. So they're turning around and trying to make as much money and pay out as little and hedge that bet and pass on that money to shareholders. So if you're a State Farm, stock investor, then maybe you have a different opinion about this. But as for us homeowners, it gets complicated. So what California did is said, nope, you can't raise prices, even though they've had really large challenges recently. For example, some of the biggest fires in California in recent history have happened in the last 5 or 6 years. And as a result, just the risk profile has changed, right? It's just a lot riskier to insure. But let's talk a little bit about what's been going on. We've had crazy wildfires, not as much this year. This has been a wet and kind of cooler year, El Nino, whatever. But we've had a hurricane this year. There was a wildfire that was one of the most destructive in history in Maui, right? We have wildfires in northern Canada that are raging on to this day. Right now, they're raging on. They're wildly out of control. We've had hurricanes in Florida. There was one in Tampa just a couple weekends ago. So there's a level of just uncertainty with weather, extreme weather, climate change, whatever the case is. We live in this kind of uncertain time. And it got me kind of freaked out because as I started calling companies to try to get my house insured, which is required for my mortgage, I wasn't able to. Now, in California in particular, the goofiness of our economics is so hard to imagine. We have 7% interest rates, right? When I heard that would happen, in my head, I'm thinking for the first time in history, home prices in California will finally fall. It's been the opposite. My house is up a huge amount of money. Now, I'm not trying to brag. It's quite the opposite. The stress that I feel now is all-time high because now the value of this house that could burn down or something could happen continues to be higher and higher. The rebuild cost is higher. And we have a kind of a perfect storm of factors, right? Crazy, ludicrous home prices in California. it would take a lot to say $1 million in California would be like the cheapest starter home you can buy. $1 million. $1 million would be like this tiny little house you buy just to get started before you buy your real house. That's where we are today, right? $2 million is not uncommon at all. In fact, where I live, it's probably about the average is $2 million. Crazy. The second part is labor rates. Labor rates in California are absolutely insane. One of my friends recently told me he got a quote for $90,000 to remodel a guest bathroom in his house. Forget rebuilding a house, remodeling a guest bathroom. Truly insane. So the insurance companies are saying, look, to cover your house in California, we need to look at all these fires, forecast in the future. Are these fires going to be more prevalent? Are they going to be more common? And then bundle that with the fact that to rebuild your home, it would cost a ton. Your value goes up, and all this stuff is just come to a perfect storm. We mentioned it's not just California. There's somebody mentioned above, kind of like, oh, freaking California again. Look, the reality is I love California. I've been here for a long time, 34 years. But yeah, we have our share of challenges. But this is not just a California problem. In fact, about 12 companies in Florida, insurance companies, have gone insolvent, meaning they've gone out of business because of all the hurricanes and natural disasters that have been happening. And Florida is actually in a way bigger heap of trouble than we are. The dominoes are just starting to fall here in California, right? As we have this problem is starting to emerge. But in Florida, they're like on the brink of collapse. They've had so many companies that have gone bankrupt that they're struggling to get people to insure companies. And like the big boys, State Farm, Allstate, these companies want nothing to do with Florida either, right? So Florida and California, ideology and politically, as different as can be, right? That you can't say, oh, crazy California. But we have similar problems with natural disasters. And if it's climate change, if it's in extreme weather and it's happening more often, these problems are going to be increasingly difficult. And this really matters because if home values keep going up, more of us have mortgages. Like if you own your home outright, that's up to you. You can insure it or not. If you don't want to insure it, that's your prerogative. But if you have a mortgage, the bank requires that you insure it because if something happened to it and it burned down, why would you keep paying that mortgage? You wouldn't. You would walk away. So that's why they make you insure a product that they're hoping that you're going to keep for a long time, at least for the course of that mortgage term. So that's kind of where we are. There's some kind of fun facts I wanted to kind of share with you guys too, right? So what are we going to do? What's the plan, right? So California has started to talk about what they can do. They're going to have like a vote. Now, the crazy part, and the part that frustrates me is it's not going to happen this year because apparently the state government can't be bothered to vote on anything else for the rest of the year. So they're going to have to wait till next year. But their goal is to have a new proposal by December 2024. And then they'd be able to allow the insurance companies to take in factors like climate change, to take in factors like increased levels of wildfire risk and stuff, right? And as a result, they're going to be able to increase prices. But they will still require approval from this board, right? From the commissioner of insurance, which is an interesting thing. There's some comments I see, and I can kind of see people's like political views. Look, you guys know I'm a very centrist person. I'm not really left or right. I'm very centrist. I've always kind of felt medium is the message, and I appreciate all opinions and views and stuff. But there is definitely a little bit of unintended consequences, right? Because if you artificially cap what a company can charge you for insurance, well, then that insurance company at some point is going to be like, it's not worth it. $1,000 a year to insure this house, which would cost $1.4 million to rebuild, is not worth it. So you know what? If you won't let us raise our rate, goodbye, we're leaving. And then a couple of companies follow suit, and then what have we accomplished? We're all kind of screwed. So ultimately, I think what we need to do is have a better system of understanding, insurance has to go up as risk goes up, right? But also consider that for the people, we got to take care of ourselves, the homeowners, right? Because if you lock in a mortgage, you expect to pay the same amount of money for the next 30 years. If suddenly your property taxes are skyrocketing and your home insurance is skyrocketing and your mortgage is going out of control, it gets really crazy. Geneva Cordoba just said in Colorado. I've mentioned Florida and California to extend this out because I've only done so much research. This isn't a full Tuba Da Vinci episode. I haven't gone 100 hours in the hood researching this. But what I've gathered, Oregon, huge problems with Oregon as well. Oregon is having a lot more wildfires more often, more earlier in the season, bigger problems there. So they're having the problem. And Colorado, which is insane because I was actually just in Denver and I didn't realize just how brown and dry Colorado is. I always thought it was a little bit more lush and green. But yeah, they're having huge challenges too. And they've mentioned that the price for premiums is outrageous, which is really disappointing. And I'll be honest with you, I always try to, as the engineer, think like an engineer. I try to come up with solutions to these things whenever I come across something. But I wanted to make this live stream equally to talk to all of you guys because I don't know what the answer is. You can't make insurance companies, do bad business and make them insure homes for, less than what the risk factor says it should be. But somebody just mentioned D-Slay04 just mentioned insurance in Louisiana. So on the West Coast, we got, Colorado, Oregon, California got fire problems. And then along the Gulf Coast, we have Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, Alabama. I've heard a lot of problems there for homes and just the hurricane seasons. When I made that video about Lahaina, the Maui fires, I found this cool app that shows you, it tracks all the hurricanes happening in real time. And I'll tell you, I wish I'd never found this source, because now I'm on there constantly just looking. And now that I'm looking, I'm just noticing it more probably. But there are hurricanes just constantly. And there might be another one this year in that Gulf Coast area, which is very prone because of the Earth's rotation and the warm Atlantic, just very prone to hurricanes. And so there might be another one. And if you can't rebuild your house, then what are we going to do, right? And the problems are kind of interesting. For example, I was reading about in Florida. In Florida, they have a problem with basically fraudulent claims. Okay, here's what's happening in Florida, and this is kind of infuriating because if it wasn't bad enough already, now there's more to the story. So while Florida only represents about 9% of insurance claims in America, so which is actually pretty high, right? 1 in 10, even though it's only 1 of 50 states, but it is a big and populous state. Even though they represent 1 out of 10 claims, they represent about over 70% of the of the lawsuits, of all the fraudulent cases and all the civil courts being filed. And the reason is what they found in this one study I was reading is there are roofing companies driving around looking at people's roofs, and if there's any little issue or any sign of anything, which is common, right? You have hail or heavy winds or hurricane rolls through, you might have damage to your roof, which is something we don't think about here in California very much. But if they see that, they'll go to the homeowner and tell them, hey, you have a huge amount of roof damage, but don't worry, you have insurance. We'll take care of it. You make us the beneficiary, or like you make us in charge of your policy, and we'll take care of the rest. It'll cost you nothing, and we'll get that roof taken care of for you. And then they come in and they do this ludicrous amount of work and replace stuff that didn't need replacing, overcharge all of it. And the insurance company says, I'm not paying this. And then they'll sue the insurance company. And then the insurance company has 2 choices: hire lawyers, pay a ton of money to fight back, or 2, just give in and pay it. And so there's fraud on top of everything else. And it's just kind of, it's a very frustrating situation. Juan and I were in Austin, Texas recently talking to some homeowners, and they mentioned that they had bigger than golf ball. This is like grapefruit, I don't know, like large orange size hail. And it just wreaks havoc on roofs. And so these kinds of problems might be more and more common. It's a very difficult problem to solve. So I'll come back to my personal situation really quickly, and then maybe we can switch it over and read some of the comments. But for us, I called State Farm, No Dice. We called Progressive. Now, Progressive was interesting. Progressive will cover some homes in California, but there's a lot of stuff you have to provide now. You have to take all these pictures. Home insurance in the past was kind of, here's your home. Yeah, we'll do a satellite picture. You're good. Covered, right? That's how easy it was in the past sometimes. Some companies are more hardcore. But Progressive said that our house is now worth too much. So they'll only cover smaller, more affordable homes in California, not more expensive homes. And the crazy thing is, guys, like I mentioned, my plan was never to have some expensive home. I didn't control any of this. I didn't want any of this. If you don't move out of your home, it going up in value doesn't mean anything. And for us, we're in our permanent home. So going up in value really almost means nothing. In fact, it's the opposite, because now my property taxes can go up, right? And my home insurance can go up. So in some ways, it's actually very stressful. So I couldn't get Progressive. now I've called around and I have a quote from Mercury Insurance, and I'm actually curious if everybody here, if you've been kind of in the same situation, you've been thinking about this, and you've gotten a quote recently, could you share it? I'll share mine. The home quote that I'm getting currently is $5,200 a year for the home, $5,200 a year for the home. I used to pay like $2,000. I paid $2,000 a year. That's what I used to pay at my old house. Understandably, the new house is bigger and stuff. That's fine. But my rate is about to go up by like $2,500 a year, I think. Now, the worst part about this is now I have to also think about my car insurance, because if I want to get those prices down, I want to bundle all three. Jeannie says USAA for insurance. I love it. So I was a civilian in the Navy, but I don't qualify. You have to be enlisted. But USAA, if you can get USAA insurance, by far one of the ones that most people I know who can get it, have it, and love it. I just couldn't though. Christian says 5,000 is the taxes on the house. I wish my property taxes were 5,000. My property taxes are about 4 times that, almost 20,000, believe it or not. It says Michael Phelps says 2,000 a year for home, worth about a quarter of yours. Yeah. Okay. So I mean that actually adds up, right? Quarter of the home value and about quarter of the price. Okay. So you know what? Maybe 5,000 isn't bad, but yeah, it's. Yeah, people are saying you got to move ASAP. So one of the most interesting things I've always noticed being on YouTube, I get to kind of see these trends. There's a lot of like anti-California hate, which is interesting because if you've ever been to California, it's really, really nice. The weather outside is like 70 something. It's perfect. It's been perfect for almost the whole year. We've actually been getting more rain than normal this year, but the weather's really nice. The jobs pay really well. The schools here where I live anywhere are good. It's just a nice place to live. But you're right. At some point, if I'm working so hard, making all this money or whatever, do I want to just give it up to the government and taxes and to the insurance companies? Or do I want to keep more of it, right? So I have thought about it. I'm not going to lie to you. I think my wife is in the chat watching, so she might chime in. She doesn't want to move. I'm a little more open to the idea. I've been here for 35 years. I wouldn't mind moving and trying something different. I did live in Maryland for a year out of college when I was working for the Navy, and that was cool. But I just kind of missed home, and all my family was here and stuff. But so Ari Soothsayer says, I live in California, but I hate it because I cannot afford to move out of it. So I think what Ari means is you can't afford to move if you ever want to come back. Because if I could leave California and move to any state, to any country, and buy like a compound, probably, right? I was actually in Vancouver. I'll take that back. Vancouver is crazy expensive. Vancouver, Canada. For somebody from Southern California to say a place is expensive is unheard of. But Vancouver is crazy expensive. But other than that, I can move to any state, New York included, okay? Even like maybe not like Manhattan, but like every other state in the nation, most other countries in the world, I could buy an amazing place, probably cash at this point. So California is kind of out of control. But the problem is if I do that, you're probably never coming back. Like if I were to sell this house and move, and I said, you know what, I want a house just like this again back in I'm probably never going to be able to afford to come back. So that's kind of the thing that and again, that's just stress. I don't want that in my life. I don't want to feel like I'm stuck or I can't move or something, right? It's just annoying. Somebody asked about the Navy. I was a civilian. I was an aerospace engineer for the F-18 fighter program for about 6 years, but I was a civilian, so I wasn't enlisted. And USAA is only for enlisted folks. So I wish I had it, but I don't. So I'm kind of curious how others have played it. So carrying on with my situation, so Progressive was a no. I called around and I got a quote from Mercury. So Mercury Insurance is willing to. And my mom and dad just told me that they have nationwide insurance and that they have a person that I just chatted with, give my information. We'll see what the quote comes back at. But what's crazy is at this point, life is such a funny thing and psychology plays a big role. If I could just get any insurance I wanted, I'd be complaining about prices, right? But when there's like no one's willing to insure you, suddenly 5,000, whatever amount of money you're like sold, I'll take it, right? Because you feel like you're coming from a place of weakness because you don't have any choices and you're kind of stuck with whatever you can find. And it's a horrible feeling, but Yeah, so Kevin says Californians look outside the state and must think the rest of the country is hell, too hot, too cold. Yeah, so I don't think it's hell. I love most of America. We're going to Texas again, actually, in a couple of weeks to meet with this cool company. We've recently been in Colorado. You know, we were in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've only been to Detroit, not Grand Rapids. I loved Grand Rapids. I thought it was absolutely superb. It was like Anytown, USA, really nice, great place for kids and family. But yeah, it's really hot in every every other part of the world, and it's really cold, and we're neither. I mean, San Diego is hard to complain about weather-wise, but there's got to be more to life than weather, right? So at this point, yeah, I have until November to make a decision, but I do have one option now. It's really expensive, not my favorite ideal situation, but I'm going to keep shopping for a little bit longer and eventually make the decision. But if others of you guys are kind of in a similar situation where you live in some of those places we mentioned, sound off in the comments. We'll see if we can find some resources and stuff. There are some funds that are included. For example, the insurance companies in California have to pay into this fund to operate here. And that money goes into a fund to insure people who cannot get insurance otherwise. People who live in like really high risk areas or like below sea level. I don't know. Just like New Orleans comes to mind. New Orleans has got to be really hard to insure because they are kind of below sea level, and the next hurricane or something could be, catastrophic again. They built levees and things, but there's a risk there. Yeah, Grand Rapids leads the pack. I truly loved Grand Rapids. The food was good. And it's incredibly, incredibly affordable. Truly, it was amazing. So we have to figure this out. So if you have any other questions, let us know. The really bad part too, if you artificially, like if the government comes in and says you cannot raise prices above this number for some arbitrary reason, it's not based on data or like mathematics or science. It's just a random number because we think this is what people want to pay. If you do that, then companies leave. Well, when a company leaves, they're not paying into that fund, which means the fund made for the poorest of people or people in really bad areas that can't get insurance or whatever the case might be, that fund keeps getting smaller. So the last thing on earth you want is these big insurance companies leaving. So instead, you should absolutely be in favor of having to pay a little bit more money because otherwise the snowball effect can be way worse. And we're kind of feeling that now. I'm afraid that we're going to be in kind of like the situation Florida's in at some point, but I hope I'm wrong. Didn't Reno just flood? Yeah, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes. I thought about this recently. I have some friends that are moving to Phoenix, Arizona. I remember thinking I've been to Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm not trying to speak bad of any place. I'm sure it's a great place to raise your kids and stuff. It is brutally, brutally hot in the summertime to the point where you're like on Mars. You have to be indoors with the air conditioner running 24 hours a day. But I thought about this recently. And, California, we have fires. I guess we have hurricanes now. I don't know. Right. On the Gulf Coast, you've got hurricanes. Midwest, maybe tornadoes, hailstorms. There's all kinds of stuff. But Arizona might be the safest place, honestly. What's their big problem? Horrible, horrible weather. But that just means you have air conditioning. And their electric prices are a lot cheaper. So they can actually afford to run their air conditioning 24/7. We can't afford to run the air conditioner for like 3 or 4 hours. But luckily, we don't really have to. John says, Rick, moved to the Midwest. I love the Midwest. I truly do. I was a Green Bay Packers fan. So we went to Green Bay, Wisconsin, spent some time in Milwaukee and some other suburbs near Chicago and stuff. It was amazing. I love it there, especially in the fall and the spring. The Midwest is amazing. I have a lot of friends in Reno, So Phoenix, what about the water crisis? That's exactly right. So hopefully this at least gets us thinking about this because this is going to be a problem. Like, mark my words or write this down. I think this insurance problem is going to become, it's not really big news yet. I like to think that we break things kind of before it's all over the news, but this is going to be a problem. I predict this is going to become a major problem in the next 5 years or so.